Now we gotta talk about another crazy COVID conspiracy confirmed, as the Wall Street Journal has for us. I downloaded this morning. Take a look at this. This is a mind-blowing piece. Wall Street Journal now saying the Energy Department, which is one of the big players in scientific data of the government, not some of these other sideshow organizations that still think COVID came from natural transmission because somehow bats can infect humans. Nope. The Wall Street Journal finally flip-flopping, siding with the Energy Department and saying the Energy Department says the lab leak most likely origin of COVID, or the lab leak in China, Chinese lab leak, was the most likely origin of COVID. It's very interesting. Let's take a look at what we've got here. So the Wall Street Journal, breaking this down, the U.S. Energy Department has concluded that the COVID pandemic most likely arose from a lab leak. Remember Wuhan and how China vehemently denied that this came from a lab leak, that this was just natural transmission from like a wet market or whatever, where they were selling, certain animals or whatever, and somebody got sick at the market. They did not at all want to indicate that they were potentially responsible for the COVID pandemic. I mean, think about how many people died, how much the economy in many regards was destroyed because of COVID. Now, obviously, some things became a lot stronger thanks to government handouts and stimulus, most specifically rich governments or rich government businesses related and or closely associated with the government, whether that was the airlines or businesses receiving PPP funding or people who are real estate investors, much to the hurt of poorer people who didn't own businesses, assets, or real estate. And so anyway, very unpopular, obviously, for China to take the L on COVID, but that, what used to be right-wing conspiracy, more and more seems to be exactly what happened. The shift by the Energy Department, which previously was undecided on how the virus emerged, updated this particular 2021 document with just a small 5-page report update. And they're highlighting how different parts of the intelligence community are coming to different conclusions about the origin, but the FBI now joining with the Energy Department and saying the virus likely spread via a mishap in a Chinese lab. Some of the other departments, including the Energy Department, originally made a judgment with low confidence, quote unquote, low confidence that this came from a lab leak. But now they're switching and flip-flopping to basically saying, yeah, it was probably a lab leak. And so they go into some more detail over here. I think it's quite interesting here that the FBI previously came to the conclusion that the pandemic was likely the result of a lab leak in 2021 with, quote, moderate confidence. And they still hold the view of moderate confidence. The FBI apparently employing microbiologists, immunologists, and other scientists, and they support their conclusion that, hey, there's moderate confidence that this was a lab leak. The National Intelligence Council, which of course refused to comment here, they still have a low confidence belief that this came from natural transmission from an infected animal. The CIA and other agencies believe that, let's see here, are still undecided between the lab leak or natural transmission theories. But the Energy Department flipping is seen as a pretty big deal, and there's a reason it's on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, because the Energy Department is seen as having scientists which could actually potentially really have a conclusion in this that matters most or carries much more weight than the opinion of the FBI or the CIA. The update here, which was less than 5 pages, was not requested by Congress. Officials didn't say if an unclassified version of the update would be issued. The COVID-19 virus first circulated in Wuhan, China, no later than November of 2019. The pandemic's origin had been the subject of vigorous and sometimes partisan debate amongst, the community. A Stanford microbiologist who has argued for a dispassionate investigation into the pandemic's beginnings welcomed word of the updated findings. Kudos to those who are willing to set aside their preconceptions and objectively re-examine what we know and what we don't know about the COVID origin. Who has served on several federal scientific advisory boards. My plea is that we do not accept an incomplete answer or give up because of political expediency. And I think, unfortunately, that's what we ran into a lot of during the COVID pandemic. And it's something that I have to say, kind of funny, but finally you're getting some of the more mainstream comedy outlets picking up on how ridiculous some of the elements of the COVID pandemic were, and it's quite fascinating. For example, Elon Musk shared and retweeted a SNL. And I'll go ahead and play that clip. It's this 30-second clip here from SNL, and it's hilarious. But it also kind of makes you scratch your head a little bit. But listen to this, and then think how this relates to what we're seeing here from the Wall Street Journal. Let's listen to this one here.
Okay, so the movie goes like this. The biggest drug cartels in the world get together and buy up all the media and all the politicians and force all the people in the world to stay locked in their homes, and people can only come out if they take the cartel's drugs and keep taking them over and over. I threw the script away. I mean, who is going to believe that crazy idea? Okay, so the movie goes like this.
That's a good one. That's essentially making fun of the idea that the COVID pandemic and how it played out with gotta take the vaccine if you want to go out, play out much like a really bad movie script. But anyway, going back to the Wall Street Journal article here, it's worth noting this section here where they say the Energy Department's conclusion is the result of new intelligence and is significant because the agency has considerable scientific expertise and oversees a network of U.S. national laboratories, some of which conduct advanced biological research. Now, if we jump over here, this idea that COVID came from some form of animal source, as the Wall Street Journal points out here, is interesting because there's really a lack of an animal source. And that's why Wuhan has been sort of the center of attention, because Wuhan is where China spends most of their time studying coronavirus research. Which, remember, what is the common cold in America? The common cold is caused by 4 different strains of a coronavirus. It's really interesting. This is where you actually have people who have gotten sick with the common cold have potentially more of an immunity in the near term against COVID because they just had the common cold, which shares similarities to COVID because they're all coronaviruses, human coronaviruses, than the benefits you might have gotten from a recent booster. Kind of interesting. Immune imprinting obviously has a lot to do with that as well, as the Wall Street Journal has previously described that immune printing makes boosters substantially less effective because the more you get boosters, the more you're really just boosting your resistance potentially to the original strain of COVID in the original vaccines and not actually the new strains. Fascinating. However, the idea that Wuhan is the center of China's extensive COVID research is something we already know, and that's why the focus is on Wuhan and the idea that, hey, it's probably likely that COVID came from a lab in China and was a little oopsie-doopsies, which is pretty bad on the international community scale for China. It's more egg on the face for China because it suggests that, hey, China, you shouldn't be on the edge of research because y'all gonna screw it up. And this is exactly why the United States, in part, is also trying to limit China's access to the ability to manufacture 3 and 2 and even 1 nanometer advanced chips via companies like ASML or whatever being banned from being able to sell their chip-making machines to China because the United States doesn't trust China. Although, then again, many of us don't trust what our own government does either. But anyway, Wuhan is home to an array of labs, many of which are built or expanded as a result of China's traumatic experience to SARS, the severe acute respiratory syndrome epidemic, which began in 2002. They include campuses of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and the Wuhan Institute of Biological Products, which produces vaccines. An outbreak at a seafood market in Wuhan had initially been thought to be the source of the virus, but some scientists and Chinese public health officials now see it as an example of community spread rather than a place where the first human infection occurred, the 2021 Intelligence Community Report said. Remember, this is just now coming out, this flip from the Energy Department, an adjustment to that intelligence report. In May of 21, President Biden told the intelligence community to step up its efforts to investigate the origins of COVID and directed that review. It drew on the work of U.S. laboratories and other agencies. Congress, he said, would be kept informed of the effort. The 2021 October report said there was a consensus that COVID-19 was not the result of a Chinese biological weapons program, but it didn't settle the debate over whether it resulted from a lab leak or came from an animal. The U.S. intelligence community is made up of 18 agencies, including offices of the Energy, State, and Treasury Department. 8 of them participated in COVID origins reviews, including the National Intelligence Council. Before the report, the Energy Department prepared a study in May of 2020, concluding that a lab leak hypothesis was plausible. And only today are we hearing that it's been flipped to likely, right? The debate over COVID-19 having escaped from a lab has been fueled by U.S. intelligence and researchers from the Wuhan Institute of Virology becoming sick enough in November of 2019 that they sought hospital care. Remember some of the original doctors, in fact, one very famous doctor, whose name I can't remember at the moment, died suddenly. Who knows if that was sort of China kind of maybe encouraging that, pinch the IV line a little bit, But anyway, one of the doctors who was involved at the Wuhan Institute of Virology was coming out saying, hey, like, there's been an accident. Like, this is probably a lab leak here. It's probably our fault. And oops, that person happened to die. Anyway, the debate over whether COVID-19 might have escaped from the lab has been fueled by U.S. intelligence. The U.S. Intelligence Committee report concluded last year that this disclosure didn't strengthen either the lab leak or natural origin theory last year. Remember, that's now been adjusted. But some former U.S. officials say sick researchers were involved in coronavirus research. Lawmakers have sought to find out more about why the FBI assesses a lab leak as a likely theory. So now the FBI and the Energy Department on the same page. And they're not sharing the details, citing the integrity of investigations. But the big bottom line here is the suggestion that the Energy Department now thinks it's likely COVID started from a lab leak. Kind of crazy to think of all of the craziness we've been through likely being the result of just an experiment gone wrong.